welcome the directors Rashida Jones and Alan Hicks.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
So I'm just meeting Rashida for the first time, and Alan I know from Keep On Keeping On, which some of you may have seen before, which is the movie that introduced you to the Quincy Jones family. So how did you two first meet?
Well, we met on essentially his last day filming Keep On Keeping On, and my first day filming this movie. We met in Switzerland at the Jazz Festival. I had rented a 5D camera. I didn't know what the hell to do with it. And we met, and I asked for his help, and he helped me learn how to focus in so many ways.
So from the beginning, did you have a sense of what the structure of this was going to be? You knew you were going to film a kind of bookend, in something that you would cut back and forth in the contemporary time, and then go back in time. Talk about how you structured it at the beginning.
Yeah, well, we had a lot of conversations at the beginning of, when you're first starting a film, this is what we think we might end up doing, but luckily for us, that it really kind of stuck to that we wanted to have something that had a relationship with the president in the past, and we didn't want any talking heads in the film, so let him tell his story the whole way through the film. And we also would like, if we can find as much audio or video from each era, we would use that in that era to give the audience the feeling of what it's like to be in that time period. And for example, when Quincy has the aneurysm in the 70s, that's audio of him getting interviewed in the hospital. So that the fact that he's such a well-covered person, it allowed us to be able to say, I think we will go out and do this, and we were able to keep to it.
It must have been sort of revelatory for you. I mean, you went into the archives and you looked at all this stuff and you thought you knew maybe more than you did, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's the beauty of him, is that I think even if you're a fan or related to him, you never get the breadth of his accomplishments and who he is as a person, really. And, he opened up the archives to us, and there was stuff I had never seen before that I don't think anybody had seen since it was made or shot or whatever. But for me, I think seeing how many times in his life he's pushed himself to the limit in the most positive and negative ways, to push through a boundary, or to just have a nervous breakdown, or come up against a health crisis over and over again, and bounce back and stay resilient, and then do the best work of his life that he's ever done. I think I finally saw the pattern as we were putting the movie together, and I think there was something kind of nice about knowing that, because it's hard to watch somebody that you love push themselves to the brink.
So you knew he had written the memoir, and you knew a lot of the material that was in that, and you took advantage of that. That was the voiceover, in a way. Explain how you did that.
Well, that's his voice throughout the film is a mixture of. He did do an audiobook in 2001, but it's a mixture of interviews from different periods as well. So I'd say it's probably like 50-50 bits of audio that were lost in his vault that was never heard before, and the things that were out there in the world already. But the way that he is able to confidently tell those hard truths about himself all the way through is something that I noticed just filming him for all those years. Like, oh my God, he'll just put it out there, and it seems like he's done that his whole life,
But there you are in the middle of this thing, and he gets sick. That must have been excruciating for you.
Yeah, it was awful. And my brother filmed some stuff, and I filmed some stuff in the hospital. And really the point of us filming that was, it was not exploitive, it was not for the movie, it was because we wanted to show him what he had been through when he came out. That was the point of it. And then, we had many, many discussions about including it in the film, and the truth is, ultimately, in the story of his life, it's important to show, and we would have never put it in if he had hadn't been okay with it, and he let us, wait to the very last minute before he saw the film. He saw it like when it was locked. He said, just do your thing. I want to see it when you guys are done, which is so great. I mean, I think that's the only way to get this kind of film, is to not have the subject hovering over you all the time, especially when it's your dad. But it felt like the right thing to include, because it echoes earlier things that he's done in his life, and it also shows how strong he is. And we were all prepared for the worst. Obviously, it was really, really scary. We were making plans about how to talk to him when, if he came to, and he just woke up and was like, I'm never drinking again. See you guys later. How at 82 do you just decide to stop drinking? I mean, I don't understand him. He's a real one of a kind.
But you also must have seen some things and learned some things about his past that were revelatory too. And you show us that he was compensating for some hole inside of himself, as many artists seem to do.
Yeah, I mean, I always, because I knew his mother, and she was around, and you can see she's got this formidable presence, and we've always felt like, Grandma Sarah's here, we gotta behave. So I think we got a sense of what kind of impact she had on his life, but only from like an adult point of view. I think seeing that little boy who's terrified and running, and then especially that footage when he goes back to his house. One of my favorite parts of the movie is when he says, I got it, I got how much she loved us, because his whole life he'd been running from the truth of his past, which is that he kind of lost his mom, but in that moment he was able to feel empathy for her, which is like the thing that I love the most about him, is that he can do that in the most trying moment in his life,
So this is the question I was going to ask you that I was afraid to ask you.
Okay. Here we go.
No, I mean, he had so many children, and I just wondered how you all got along, and how well you knew each other, and how much time you spent with each other, and were you the youngest and the one that sort of got the most from him in a funny way because he had reformed? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's fair game. We made the movie. Here we are. We are all very close. We range in 40 years in age, the siblings, and it's been a very different experience having him as a father for all of us. And I do feel lucky and sometimes guilty, because my sister Rashida and I did have our parents around and with us for 10, 12 years in a way that I would have never known at the time. I only know now that I know my other siblings' experiences. My sister Jolie, my dad had her, he was 19 in New York, just trying to, get by. She was kind of, she was forced to be independent so early on, and I have so much respect for that now. But yes, I absolutely feel like we got this great version of him, because he was old enough to really appreciate being a father at that point. But now, the truth is, now we all are cool with each other, and we all have Thanksgiving and Christmas and Father's Day together, and that's, you see it in the movie, and that's real. And that's because he is this kind of, he's the epicenter of love, and that's a real thing. So like, you can't deny what he's emitting, and you can't really do drama in the face of that. Like, you kind of have to respect that energy, and that's why we all come together, because we come together around him.
And did you enjoy becoming a filmmaker and learning how to use the camera and all that stuff?
I don't know if I ever got really good at the camera, but yeah, this process has been incredible. Mainly just being able to spend time with my dad, but also spending time with Al, who's so meticulous and compassionate and thoughtful, and then the fact that he was not a member of our family and could provide some perspective. We could talk through things that I've taken for granted in terms of storylines and things. It just was a really great experience, yeah.
Okay, so that brings up the other issue, which would be, as a family member, you love your dad, and it would be natural that you would want to present him in the best possible light, but you were there. So what was that conversation like in terms of balancing that out in the end? In the final edit, that's where it would have to be.
It was, you know, it's not about the final letter. The way we work is every day. So, and you've seen from the movie that every scene's so complicated, and the way Quincy is, you know, sometimes he can be unhinged and abrupt, and like one of the first things that happened was as soon as I came and started working with Rashida, Quincy nearly passed away, and it was just.
And you'd been through that recently.
Yeah,
the other movie.
with Keep On Keeping On, the Clark Terry had actually just passed away right before coming onto this film, and I was like, oh my god, am I like a bad luck? But you know, there's these realities with a person that's so public, as a public figure like Quincy, and you know, there's things in the movie like the hospital stuff that the conversation was coming from my side is like, I'm not sure, and Rashida saying, I think we need to tell exactly the way it is. And there's, you know, as far as, and the way we shot the movie too, it's a different kind of approach that I think is starting to come into play now. That they've got more lightweight cameras and it's cheaper to shoot for longer periods. But we shot 800 hours of footage of Quincy over a period of 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
And on Keep On Keeping On, we shot 450 hours, and I was like, oh my god, I will never be able to get. That's, you know, I can't do that again. And yeah, we nearly doubled it, and then we went into the archives, and we were working in Quincy's archive in his basement, and it took us nearly a year to get through the whole archive, and it was, I think we scanned like 20,000 photos and digitized all these VHS tapes, and we came up and talked to Quincy and said, hey man, we finished the archive, and he's like, oh, that's beautiful, but have you seen the vault? and then, oh god, so, and then we went to the vault, and it's in freezing temperatures, and it's where he keeps, and he's like, that's where you find all the good shit.
Oh.
Yeah.
He was right.
And so that's where the Super 8 footage of Quincy is, that's where the Ray Charles and Frank Sinatra recordings are of them talking.
My favorite part.
There's all these things that people have never heard before, and he hadn't heard before. You know, he's too busy to sit down and listen to raw tapes of interviews, you know, through his career. So, and when we showed Quincy the film the first time, that was, at least for me, some of the most powerful stuff was hearing him, watching him listen to Ray Charles talk to him, and Ray's been long
That
since
made me
gone.
cry.
And yeah, and Frank Sinatra talking about his friend, and this is all stuff Quincy had never heard before, and you know, and for him to give us the trust to make the film, and you know, it's Quincy Jones. Oh my God! Like, I really hope he likes it, and thank God, thank God he liked it.
Well, it did strike me that you had a lot more good stuff that you didn't use. It must have been painful to cut that down. I don't know how to explain it, but it shows a great deal of discipline.
Thank you. I really wanted to make a film under 2 hours. We did pretty well.
Close.
We did pretty well.
204.
This could be a series, obviously. There's so much there. I think it was important for us. We wanted to make the definitive film so that if you didn't know anything about him, and you wanted to know more about him, you got pretty much the scope of the career plus some hang time. You got to see who he was, and if you are a fan, you still will be surprised by some things and still feel like you get some hang time. So I think the goal was rhythm, because especially when you're making a movie about a musician, you can't slack off when it comes to the rhythm and the melody of the film. That was important,
I love those moments where you show him just even some of those sessions late in his life. You can see him hearing the music and timing it, and you know that he can hear it really well. So did he give you any feedback on the rhythm of the movie?
I mean, he loved it. The first time, he's watched it several times now, but the first time he watched it, he laughed, he cried. He participated like a audience member, and at the end of the film, which is perfectly said, because everybody watches this film and feels really lazy, and like they have to get their lives together. And he said, "I wish I could live forever."
Wow. All right, let's open it up for some questions. Raise your hand, okay, go ahead.
Well, I have to say congratulations. I was so lucky to have been able to attend the premiere of this a few weeks ago and had to come back again and see it on the big screen and bring friends. But my question, just from an editing standpoint, how did you decide, because it has a really such a brilliant flow going back and forth with the flashbacks, you know, and archival footage and him, you know, his own voice. How did you decide how to approach that? Because there was so much obvious footage there. You know, was that something that was a concept from the beginning, or did it evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I think a little bit of both. She asked I don't know if everybody heard it, but just about the editing process. I think what we did know is we wanted it to feel emotional and visceral and personal, and that we wanted it to the story to move forward, both in the archival and in the present day. But I think what really makes that work is that we chose to take his emotional moment wherever he was in the verite and use that as to plug back into the, you know, his own feelings about the archival footage. So like, you know, there's the transitions, we always looked for, sometimes there's a visual match, but then it was mainly like an emotional match is what we looked for.
One of the things I really got a kick out of was the whole lining up of this extraordinary concert, this African American Museum thing, where you start with him just sort of, let's get, you know, Oprah and, you know, Colin Powell and Obama, you know, and then he makes it so, and calls up Colin. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, there's the concert itself, like the physical thing the goal that he's pushing towards. But as you know, as we're going through the film, making the film, it's just seeing all of these racial barriers that he continued to come up against through his life, and the fact that I don't know, that once we started filming, all of a sudden the African American Museum it reaches out to him, and it's the one thing that he says, "I'm well enough to do this. Let's go." And it's one of those things that just you can't plan that, but from him coming from the poverty in Chicago, and then that he couldn't write the strings because he was African American, and he punched through that, and the Vegas, all of these things that he consistently, he's just see it as a challenge, and would figure out a way to get past it, and that lining up with the museum, I think this. Once we saw the museum as the major thing that he was striving towards, it was I don't know.
It really works, and it just gives you a way of looking at the breadth of what he accomplished in one fell swoop. It's hard to even encompass the whole thing. It's overwhelming.
Yeah, and I mean the museum itself is also incredibly overwhelming. If you've not been to that museum, I highly suggest it. I think it should be mandatory for everybody in this country to see that museum. It's the depth of just materials and specificity, but then also, you know, the first floor, giant floors all pre-slavery Africa, and then the next floor, giant floors all slavery, and like a giant floors Jim Crow, and then you get to this like little floor on the top that's like a celebration of like the African American experience and contribution to this country, and that represents the history of this country. Most of it is pretty shameful and really difficult, and then 50 years, and not even 50 years, is a celebration of the contribution, you know, and still there's struggles. So there was something really nice about that being at the end of the journey, because he represents so much of those decades, you know, to come from the 30s and to be here now and to see what it looks like to transcend those barriers in every single decade, how it kind of changes the tone a little bit. He's like a living museum, so it kind of felt fitting, you know.
Absolutely, very well said. Okay, some more questions. You, woman, yeah.
I just wanted to thank you. I thought it was brilliant. I really loved it. I cried a lot.
Good, that's good.
I really liked how you intertwined from the past and the future, present, all of them together. It was great.
Thank you so much.
Sir?
Hi, my name is Dwayne The Rock, I'm a music producer. I've worked with your dad during Quest Records, produced a lot of remixes and stuff. What I loved about the energy is it was real. Got a chance to hang out with your dad, a lot of Stevie Wonder. And one thing that I didn't see that I was hoping to see is about him having he told me he speaks 22 different languages. And when he was, in some spots he was, showing that he was, reading it in the language of the land. I just know, like, this is gonna touch so many people from so many demographics because he created livelihoods. There's a lot of people my age, younger or older, that just lived off his vibration. So this is gonna supersede our kids. He's a living legend. I am honored to meet him, and I just say this is incredible. And another thing, there is Bobby Holland, he's a photographer that did a lot of stuff with your dad, and I saw a lot of stuff. So hopefully, when there's the next sequel, the next the part 2, you can go to Bobby Holland's vault because he got a lot of stuff with your dad.
Yeah, more vaults.
She says no more pictures, right? So
Thank
that
you
brings
so
up
much.
the Netflix of it all. So how did you get involved with Netflix, and how did that 2 hour 4 minutes? You could have made it anyone if you wanted, right? So tell me about what the possibilities are for taking more of this material into that world.
Netflix felt like the perfect partner because for that reason that the gentleman just said, which is everybody gets to see it. And I get messages from people all over the world on the same day. The entire world got to see this. And that's so exciting because that matches what he deserves, what his life deserves. And it just felt like the right place. It just felt like a big platform to reach the most people possible. And I feel like it's a kind of a difficult time in the world right now, in the country. And, I think for us it was really important that all of these little messages, all of these aphorisms, all of these his like turns of phrase and the things that he says to himself to keep himself optimistic and positive, that they spread as far as it possibly can right now, because we need it. We need hope. So grateful that we're on Netflix. And then in terms of the time, right? I don't know. It's just it's a taste thing. We were talking about movies and running times earlier. I'm like 2 hours, great. And then there's a couple movies that I'll make the exception for that are longer than that. But I feel like that's, to me, if you can make it work in 2 hours and no longer, it will stick with you for longer.
And that's also one of the big things coming in when Rashida and I was first talking about it, how we're going to approach the film is that in 100 years you could make a biographical documentary about Quincy Jones. You can go through all of the things, but right now we can have an opportunity to find out what he's like and what it's like to be on his inner circle and to get his personality. And so that was our main focus, was for people to be able to feel what it's like to hang out with Quincy, and for all these people later down the track to be able to, in 100 years, to be able to go, oh my God, that's what it was like to be around that guy.
Well, I was lucky in Toronto to have a few minutes with him also, which was really a joy, a pleasure. He gave me one of those bracelets. All right, go ahead.
I have 2 questions, but one is for Casey. She had a question about Quincy's brother and what had happened with his brother.
Oh, Lloyd.
Quincy's brother?
He passed away from cancer about 15 years ago. It was like his baby. They were so close. And actually, Gloria, who's in the film, that was Lloyd's wife before he passed away. So they're very much still in her life.
And then my other question, because impressed with how he was saying that he wanted to see peace for people and peace for our Mother Earth, I'm really impressed at not only his whole journey, but how he connected everybody together. So, you have an amazing father.
Thank you, yeah.
So
No,
thank
thank
you.
you.
She's impressed with how
Very
they
grateful.
connected everything together.
Thank you.
Well, he's been trying to save the world for a long time.
I know, that clip is from 1990, right, when he went, and he just wants peace to take care of the earth.
That was lovely.
Remember when it was like, it was like on trend to care about the earth? Remember that? It's like a brief moment in time.
Go ahead.
I enjoyed the film, the way you told the story, and also I felt it while watching the film that since the day he met your mom Peggy in 70, I think it's going so skyrocketed all his career. Do you feel or do you agree with me?
We're gonna give my mom all the credit for that. I'm fine with that. I think their love was, and I'm biased, obviously, it's my parents, but their love was incredibly energizing for him, but he's a workaholic, and he also has been working for all the moments that he's created. There have been no mistakes, there's been lightning in a bottle, there's been all this luck in terms of timing and, when he's decided to do things, but he worked his ass off his whole life, and luckily he's had love and support along the way, and I'm sure that's a huge reason why he's able to continue to be successful, for sure, and they're still friends, which is really nice.
And how long you continue to do the yoga things? On the film you show that young yoga teacher, but didn't mention about her name. Most of the time, correctly, you did have names of the people
Yoga teacher? I don't know. Is he still,
No,
he's still
but
doing
everybody
it?
in the film.
No,
Yeah,
Usually
not
they-
everybody's name.
Not
But he
his
is doing
name.
yoga. He did an hour and a half of yoga this week.
It's sick.
Yeah.
All right. Sir?
How's he health-wise now?
Yeah.
He's really good. He's really good. I think having this movie has been so great. It's just been great for our family. He's so happy. He's so proud. He's been so supportive of the movie, and it's great. He's really good.
Last audience question, sir?
When you were finalizing the music of the film, were you also thinking of a unique selection of a soundtrack that will come out separately from the film, and any
What's going on with
special mixes
soundtrack?
for that?
Yes, the question was, do we have a soundtrack coming out for the film? We do. It's out. It's on Spotify. You can see the soundtrack for the movie. It's I think 12 or 13 tracks for the soundtrack. But thankfully, with Spotify,
Competitor, Spotify.
because of the playlist stuff, we've been able to put a playlist out there that's got all of the music. It's like 90 songs or something. So there's an awesome playlist out there.
And the last song is an original song that was made for the movie. That was produced by my dad and Mark Ronson that Shaka Khan was on. So that's
Oscar contender.
So.
In every way. So the music rights issues, were they made easier because he was involved? You're
Licensing
laughing.
was no joke.
No, those things are
It was
bitchy.
no joke.
Yeah.
There's a lot of material, audio and visual material in this movie. But yeah, it was made slightly easier by the fact that, a lot of the stuff, my dad had the publishing for a lot of the stuff that he wrote, yeah. But it was not easy.
Our producer, Paula, was telling me the other day there's 725 contracts. Because there's so many people that are attached to every song over time, and songs get sold and bought. 725. It was gnarly.
Original film next time.
Yeah.
Oh, the original.
All right, I hope there's a way for you to continue this in some weird way. I think there's more.
Yeah, there is
All
more.
right, thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.